Hey guys, this is John Watts. I had a great question here from Carlos Garcia, and he says, "Excellent info as always. Thank you." Well, you're very welcome. He says, "What is your take on mortgage forbearance and foreclosure and the tsunami of bankruptcies coming soon in the near future? In other words, when does the party end?" And so, great question there. And the short answer is nobody knows. Okay. Let me take you back in time a little bit. So I'm recording this in March of 2021. In March of 2020, when we all learn about COVID and we get these lockdowns, the natural thing was that there would be a massive wave of foreclosures because, we had just unprecedented unemployment rates. Well, that didn't happen because the federal government stepped in and said, hey, if you have a federally backed mortgage, there's a moratorium or a freeze on foreclosures. And then the CARES Act comes and you basically can get 12 months of not making any mortgage payment. Well, that covered about 2/3 of all mortgages, but what about the other third? Well, most of those other third, particularly if it was with sort of a real company, I'm not talking about like, you know, Bob owns the mortgage for you, but you're dealing with a bank or a servicer, and they generally followed the same rules and they held off on foreclosures. They weren't required to. Now, some states required them to, but like in Alabama, there was no requirement. And so they didn't do foreclosures and they gave a lot of forbearances because of COVID. So, we didn't have this wave of foreclosures. Matter of fact, foreclosures, if you think about it, like back in 2009, let's say we were having 2 million foreclosures a year. Well, by 2019, it's about like 250,000. And my numbers may be off, but just to give you sort of a feel, they're way, way down. 2020 hits and COVID hits, and that number goes like cratered through the ground. Okay. And so we didn't have foreclosures. And and I'm not being critical of the government for doing this because they were trying to do what they could to save the economy. Interest rates, were cut. And so now it's like it's an unbelievable time if you still have a job, if you have money to refinance your house or to go buy a bigger house. And so we're in this weird deal where, housing prices have just skyrocketed. And I see different numbers, but maybe 15%. And I just looking around in my own neighborhood and, keeping up with real estate, you go, well, hey, that house was 300,000 last March and now it's selling for like 330, 345, 350. Like that's amazing, the increase. And so, it seems like from my perspective, the economy is getting back on track. Now, I think we're in a housing market bubble, okay? And, I'm old enough to have lived through, some of these bubbles. And the one thing about every bubble is the people that are involved in it. So, for example, real estate agents, mortgage brokers are like, this time is different. There's no bubble. We're just going to keep going up. Let me just say this, nothing ever just keeps going up, okay? A stock will go up and then it comes down. There was a tulip bubble, if I remember right from reading this in history. I'm not quite this old, but like in the 1500s or something, where for some reason the price of tulips goes just like, thousands of percent. So I think at some point that music stops. And, is that going to be when the federal government stops extending this forbearance period? Because, Biden comes in and now that's been extended again. So now we're in a position where people can go, 15, 18 months without making a mortgage payment. Well, I'll just tell you from experience, and I've represented hundreds and hundreds of people that are dealing with foreclosure. When you go that long without making a payment to your mortgage company or to a lawyer or to somebody, it's just human nature. You get used to not making that payment. And then when you get to the end of that, and they're like, okay, we need you to make your regular payment, like all these missed months, we'll put those on the back end. Well, even that becomes difficult. But here's what we're just now starting to see is the non-federally backed loans. So those folks were given, 6-month, 9-month, 12-month forbearance. Well, now when that forbearance is ended, people are going to those servicers saying, well, hey, look, what can you do for me? And the servicer's like, I need your normal payment and I need you to make half of the missed payment every month. So in other words, if your mortgage was $2,000 a month, you pay $2,000 plus you got to pay an extra $1,000 to clear up all this back stuff. And people are like, no, 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 I can't do that. I just want to put on the back end. And these companies are going, no, we're not doing that. And so we're seeing in Alabama foreclosures being set, which I'll be honest, I didn't think would happen till probably the fall of 2021. So I don't know how long we're going to keep telling people, hey, you can go months and months and months without making payments. And what are we going to do with evictions? If we're telling people you don't have to make your rent payment, well, somebody owns that house. Are they not having to make their mortgage payment? Well, eventually they will. So even if they're given sort of a forbearance, you still have to make that up. But as the renter that's gone 6 months or 12 months, and maybe through no fault of their own, they just have no money, it's unlikely they're going to pay all that money back. So at some point, it seems to me, kind of boom, the music stops and it's going to be very painful. And the longer we extend this, I think the more painful it's going to be. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of driving late at night. Maybe, you're like, I don't want to stop for a hotel. Just want to keep on going and getting there. And you're sleepy and, you're drinking a bunch of Mountain Dews or something. You might can stay awake, but at some point, the crash becomes painful. And you're like, wow, why did I sleep 12 hours? Well, because we sort of artificially extended this. So, in terms of foreclosures, I think at some point there is a tsunami, an avalanche of those things coming. Maybe the Biden administration will extend this further and maybe it can be extended so long and we can just keep, sort of printing money and we can get through this without wrecking the economy. But I think the odds are that there will be a painful crash. When that happens, people are facing the loss of their home. A lot of times they go to bankruptcy attorneys. Now, frankly, I think there are better options than bankruptcy attorneys. But that's when we'll see the spike. To my knowledge, there hasn't been the big spike in bankruptcies that we're expecting. Because again, it's like, hey, we're getting stimulus checks or unemployment, additional benefits for people. And look, you can't live on at least what the unemployment rate is in Alabama, the unemployment benefit. Like you can't live on that. So you have to have some extra. And, it's this balancing act. You want businesses to be safe, but then they don't have the money to pay their employees, so the government pays. You kind of have to have one with the other. If you're going to tell people you can't work, well, then you've got to take care of them. So, we haven't seen the massive wave of bankruptcies. Maybe it's coming. Maybe it's next month. But I think it'll be tied with the foreclosures because that's how a lot of people save their homes. The collectors, are ramping up. I can tell you the IRS, they are, right now, they haven't sort of opened the floodgates of collection against people, but that is a tidal wave coming. And it's going to be hitting people for their 2019 returns or 2020 returns. And there's just going to be a whole world of hurt with that, where people are going to get bank levies. Okay, so it's like a garnishment. The IRS just calls it a levy. Liens on your house and all sorts of things. And so I do think for a lot of people, there are going to be a whole bunch of folks really, really suffering because of this, COVID situation, what we had in 2020 extending into here, these rapidly escalating house prices, which seems like a good thing, right? Because you should be able to sell your house and make money, which you can, but then how do you go get another house? If your house has gone up, but every other house has gone up and rentals have gone up, it's all kind of six or one half dozen the others. So, if you're in a house that you cannot afford, my suggestion is work really, really hard with your mortgage company to try to come up with a solution and see if there's some way maybe you can sell that, make some money, and then downsize or do something. I mean, it's not a great solution, but the bankruptcy solution, filing Chapter 13 bankruptcy, you still have to have the money to pay your house, okay, and to pay those back payments. And so I do think there's a wave coming. I do think, this is the boom year, or boom years, I should say, for collectors. I mean, portfolio recovery, LVMV, all those guys are like, this is fantastic. It's an amazing opportunity to buy up a ton of debt really cheaply and then go collect it, okay? And so they are kind of in an anti-recession business. In other words, as the economy's doing great, well, debt collectors don't really do great. But as the economy tanks, that's when they really make their money. It's sort of like, Warren Buffett saying, buy when there's blood in the streets. In other words, when everybody's saying sell, sell, sell the stock market, well, that may be the time to buy. And when everybody's going, buy, 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 well, maybe that's the time to sell. And so, these are great times for collectors, and I don't think that's going to change. One thing I will point out, in November of this year, 2021, we should see these new rules. And I've done one part, and I'll do, every couple of days, the remaining parts of the current FDCPA, and then we'll get into these new rules. It's really amazing stuff where they can send you text messages, Facebook messages, friend requests on Facebook. They can do all sorts of things. And some of it's not really good for us. Some of it, I think they are going to completely mess it up. And the FDCPA is what we call a strict liability statute. You break the law, you get sued. It doesn't really matter about your intent or did you have evil, motives in your heart. We don't really care about that. So I think we're going to see collection really rise, and we'll see collection abuse rise. And so the key to that is to know your rights and then to take action. And that should result in a lot more lawsuits against these collectors being filed. So, Carlos, that's a very, short question you asked, and I may have given a way too long answer to it. But I do think that, probably this year, unless the federal government just keeps extending everything and, keeps throwing money at this. And I'm not judging whether that's good or bad. It's just, at some point we can't keep throwing money at it. And, does it make it more painful at that point? I don't know. And, everybody's trying to figure out the best way to get through this situation because everybody, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, I think everybody understands we're kind of sitting on a ticking time bomb. How do you get around that? One approach is say, just let it happen naturally. Let the economy dip and then rise. And another approach is, hey, let's keep pouring money into this. Let's give, rent relief there's proposals from the progressives about, for the next, 12 months, nobody has to make a mortgage payment. Nobody has to make a rental payment. The government will just take care of all that. It sounds great, if you have a mortgage or you rent. I'm not sure where all that money's coming from, okay? So in any event, everybody's trying to figure out a solution. I would like to think that both parties and liberals, progressives, conservatives, moderates, that they're all approaching this from an honest standpoint, legitimately trying to fix it, not how do I scheme politically to help my side and hurt the other side. Let's hallucinate for a moment these are all legitimate. Well, they have different approaches, and we'll see, who wins. But my expectation is, this year we'll see the foreclosures start to come back, and unless the federal government does something, by the end of this year, I think there could be just a massive wave of foreclosures, which typically will then drive down housing prices. And so then think about what happens. Here's a house worth $300,000 last year. You buy it at $360,000, and then there's a crash, and now that house goes down to $280,000. Well, guess what? You're 80 grand underwater. Now, you may have a fabulous interest rate, but you're like, I'm 80 grand underwater. So, how hard are you going to fight to keep that house? Or are you going to be like, forget it? Which then that just sort of perpetuates this thing of now we're driving prices down until eventually enough people start going, hey, these are good deals, let me buy. And then it starts to come back up. So that's what everybody's trying to avoid. They all have different approaches, but I would expect to start to see that, this fall, unless there's another major intervention. So hope that that's helpful. And look, I hope I'm totally wrong on this and just, life is just, housing prices and income and everything's just perfectly going up. I just don't think that's the real world. So, figure out for yourself what's going on, what you need to do to be safe, to make sure that you protect what you have and that you can, thrive in this opportunity if possible and at least not get hurt in it. And obviously, we've got to help people, that maybe are not as fortunate. So, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye bye.